A common wellness influencer technique is to create distrust in scientific and medical institutions. In a for-profit healthcare system like America, that's not hard to do. But these influencers pretend they're the antidote providing credible information. And time and again, they just do not do that. Let's look at 3 examples. First up, Jillian Michaels, who was on the MAHA congressional panel last year and has revived her former career as a fitness influencer, now as a contrarian wellness podcaster.
Everyone's outraged about RFK. He's not a doctor. Oh my God, he's trying to get to the root of autism and he's misguided about it. Where was your outrage when Xavier Becerra, who's not a doctor, wanted to remove all age limits for sex changes on kids, whether surgery or not, the medicalization component that we talked about? Like, that to me is a group psychosis.
None of that is true. I know, it's on Rogan, so it must be. Xavier Becerra never made those recommendations. Assistant Secretary of Health Rachel Levine did recommend lowering age limits, not abolishing them entirely, for hormone treatments, mastectomies, and other gender-affirming surgeries. But these recommendations were removed before the guidelines were published. If you really cared about this issue, you figure you'd get your activism right. But nope, which brings us to Mark Heyman, who told Barry Weiss the following about vaccines.
The way vaccines are studied is against other vaccines. It's not against a placebo. So if I want to study a new drug, let's say a new anti-inflammatory drug like Advil or Aleve, and I should study it against a placebo, not against Advil, right? Because there's going to be an underlying baseline of side effects. We know Advil causes kidney failure and it causes gastrointestinal bleeding and it causes all these other things. But if you study against a placebo, you'll see there'll be a difference. But vaccines are not studied against placebo. That's a big problem.
Completely untrue. Every vaccine is tested against a placebo. What he might be referring to are updates to existing vaccines which are not tested against placebos for ethical reasons. But that's not what he says. Here's the reality of vaccines being tested against placebos. These people regularly criticize Western medical practitioners and pretend to care about real science, but they're so careless with their language and with their thinking in general. Science is not a vibe. And I know that precision and qualifying statements and nuance are really boring, but actual experts in their field care about getting these things right. Finally, we have Kaye Means, who in the clip I'm about to play is in discussion with chiropractor Will Cole. As a refresher, Kaye is responsible for getting RFK Jr. to go MAGA, and he's currently an advisor to Kennedy in the White House. Kaye first says that food dyes are just loaded with petroleum. Like his boss, he's not too big on chemistry. If he was, he'd know that the over 100 supplements manufacturers that he works with at his company, TrueMed, also use petroleum in the manufacturing process. Just because petroleum, which is, by the way, a natural product, is being used in manufacturing doesn't mean it ends up in the final product, because there's no oil in food dyes, which is what he says right before the clip I'm about to run. He loves telling this story about John D. Rockefeller and the Flexner Report, which was very influential in how medical institutions and education programs are now run. I've heard him tell this story a few different times, and every time he gets a bunch of shit wrong. Here's a sample.
He did, just as a factual statement, fund the first modern medical schools from Johns Hopkins to University of Chicago. And then his personal lawyer, this guy Flexner, actually basically he outsourced to Congress to create the Flexner Report, which established this siloed view of medicine.
Rockefeller was very interested in medicine, but he didn't fund the first Johns Hopkins Medical School. That opened in 1893 thanks to the philanthropic funds of Johns Hopkins. Rockefeller was the primary founder of the University of Chicago in 1890, but the medical school opened in 1927 and Rockefeller had no direct involvement. Finally, Kaye loves claiming that Abraham Flexner, who was assigned to write the the Flexner report was Rockefeller's personal lawyer, but he wasn't a lawyer at all. He was an educator. Did Joe Rogan, Barry Weiss, or Will Cole push back on any of these claims or even stop to question whether or not they're true? What do you think? And this is how so much misinformation flows through right-wing and wellness communities. These hosts just nod along without even a shred of curiosity with whether or not their guest is bullshitting them. And it's not like these examples I chose are one-offs. And if these people can't bother to do basic fact checks about whether whatever is coming out of their mouth holes is true or not, do you really want to trust them with your health?